The conference room fell silent as I slid the audit report across the mahogany table toward Emma, watching her face drain of color as she read the first line. $847,000 in unauthorized company expenditures, traced directly to your personal accounts. Her husband, Jake, my business partner of 12 years, stared at me in shock, finally understanding why his supposedly nobody friend had just called this emergency board meeting as the company's largest minority shareholder. My name is Sarah Williams, and at 34, I've built my entire career on one simple principle. Numbers never lie. People do, companies do. But spreadsheets? They tell you exactly what happened, when it happened, and who made it happen. I'd been working at Morrison & Associates for 8 years, one of those prestigious accounting firms where everyone wears expensive suits and talks about client portfolios over overpriced coffee. My colleagues always seemed surprised that I drove a modest Honda and brought lunch from home. What they didn't know was that I could afford to buy the entire building if I wanted to. Some things are better kept quiet, right? See, while everyone else was climbing corporate ladders and networking at fancy events, I'd made one investment 12 years ago that changed everything. My college roommate Jake Morrison had this crazy idea about starting a consulting business. Most people laughed. I wrote him a check. Jake and I went way back to our university days, when we'd spend hours in the library arguing about business theories and sharing dreams that seemed impossible back then. He was the visionary with big ideas and endless energy. I was the one who actually read the fine print and ran the calculations. We made a perfect team, even if most people couldn't see it. That little investment I made, it grew into a 30% stake in what became one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the state. Jake handled the clients and the big picture stuff. I stayed in the background, quietly making sure the numbers added up and the business stayed profitable. He got the spotlight. I got the dividends. Everyone was happy. Well, everyone was happy until Jake announced his engagement. The engagement party was exactly what you'd expect from someone marrying into the Blackstone family. Crystal chandeliers, servers carrying champagne that cost more than most people's rent, and enough flowers to supply a small wedding. Emma Blackstone, daughter of media mogul Richard Blackstone, had clearly spared no expense in announcing her new status as Jake's fiancée. I arrived wearing my best dress, which probably cost less than the appetizers, and immediately felt the familiar sting of being overlooked. The funny thing about being wealthy in secret is that people treat you exactly how they think you deserve to be treated. And Emma Blackstone had very clear opinions about where I belonged in the social hierarchy. "Oh, you must be Jake's little accountant. Friend," she said when Jake introduced us, her smile as fake as her perfectly whitened teeth. How sweet that he still keeps in touch with his college days. The word little hung in the air like a challenge. Emma had this way of making every conversation feel like a test you were already failing. She'd ask about my job with the kind of tone people use when discussing something mildly distasteful, then pivot immediately to talking about her father's latest media acquisitions or her connections in high society. But here's what struck me most about Emma. She had this hungry look whenever Jake mentioned the business. Not the kind of interest you'd expect from a supportive partner, but something sharper, more calculating. She'd ask detailed questions about revenue and growth, always framed as charming curiosity about her future husband's success. Then there was the way she started reshaping Jake's social circle. Suddenly, our regular coffee meetings became inconvenient. Business dinners I'd attended for years were couples-only affairs. Emma had very specific ideas about who belonged in Jake's life, and apparently, longtime friends who worked regular jobs didn't make the cut. The weirdest part? Jake went along with it. My best friend of 12 years started treating me like a distant acquaintance he was too polite to ignore completely. Every conversation became awkward, filled with these long pauses where he'd glance around like he was afraid someone important might see him talking to me. What I didn't realize then was that Emma wasn't just trying to push me out of Jake's personal life. She had much bigger plans, and they involved making sure I disappeared from his business world entirely. The firing came 3 months later, delivered with the kind of corporate politeness that makes humiliation feel almost civilized. My supervisor at Morrison & Associates called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. The kind of meeting that starts with "we need to talk" and ends with security walking you to your desk. "There have been some concerns raised about your performance," he said. shuffling papers he clearly didn't want to look at. Questions about your professionalism and ability to handle high-profile clients. I sat there listening to him recite complaints that sounded like they'd been written by someone who'd never actually worked with me. Missed deadlines I'd never missed. Client complaints from people I'd never upset. Professional conduct issues that made no sense to anyone who knew my work. But here's the thing about working in a small industry. Word travels fast. And when Richard Blackstone's media connections start making quiet phone calls about an accountant who might not be the right fit for prestigious clients, firms listen. They don't ask questions, they just act. The worst part? Jake said nothing, my business partner of 12 years, the guy whose company I'd helped build from nothing, couldn't even return my phone calls after I got fired. His assistant kept giving me the runaround about him being in meetings or traveling for business. Emma, though, she made sure to be at the coffee shop across from Morrison & Associates the day I cleaned out my desk. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. She even waved, that same fake smile plastered across her face, probably thinking she'd won some kind of game I didn't even know we were playing. Maybe now you'll understand that some circles aren't meant for nobodies like you, she said when I walked past her table. The words hit like a slap, especially because part of me had started believing them. You know what's funny about being humiliated in public? Everyone suddenly becomes an expert on what you should have seen coming. Former colleagues whispered about how I'd gotten too comfortable and should have known my place, like getting fired was somehow my fault for thinking I belonged in their world. I spent the first week after getting fired doing what most people do when their professional life explodes, feeling sorry for myself, eating ice cream for breakfast, questioning every decision I'd ever made, wondering if Emma was right about me being a nobody who'd somehow fooled everyone for years. Then I remembered something important. I wasn't just Sarah Williams, recently fired accountant. I was Sarah Williams, 30% owner of one of the state's fastest-growing consulting firms. And unlike Jake, I actually read the partnership agreements we'd signed. See, when you own a significant chunk of a company, you have rights, lots of them, including the right to request comprehensive financial audits whenever you have reasonable concerns about company management. I'd helped write those bylaws years ago, back when Jake and I trusted each other completely. Well, Emma's behavior definitely qualified as a reasonable concern. The audit request took exactly 3 minutes to write and another 2 to send via certified mail. Legal language has this beautiful way of cutting through personal drama and getting straight to business. Jake couldn't ignore certified legal documents the way he'd been ignoring my phone calls. His response came within 24 hours. Panic, barely disguised as professional courtesy. Sarah, this seems unnecessary. Can't we just talk? But the thing about being publicly humiliated is that it clarifies your priorities wonderfully. I wasn't interested in talking anymore. I was interested in facts. The financial records arrived a week later, delivered by a very nervous-looking junior associate who probably drew the short straw at Jake's office. Boxes of receipts, bank statements, expense reports, and credit card statements going back 18 months. Everything I'd requested, and then some. Let me tell you something about being a forensic accountant. It's like being a detective, except instead of looking for fingerprints, you're tracking money. And money leaves the most beautiful trails when people think nobody's watching. Emma's spending patterns jumped off the pages like neon signs. The woman had been treating Jake's business account like her personal shopping fund since the day they got engaged. Designer handbags charged as office supplies. Spa treatments listed as client entertainment. A $15,000 wedding dress somehow categorized under professional consulting fees. But that was just the obvious stuff. The really interesting discoveries came when I started cross-referencing dates and amounts. That charity gala Emma dragged Jake to last month. The one where she bought a new gown and got her hair done professionally, all charged to the company as a networking event, even though Jake's business had nothing to do with the charity involved. Then there were the vendor invoices. Emma had been incredibly creative with these, setting up fake companies for wedding planning services and charging consultation fees to Jake's business. The woman had literally invoiced her future husband's company for planning their own wedding. The audacity was almost impressive. My favorite discovery, though, was the honeymoon. They hadn't even gotten married yet. But Emma had already booked a 2-week trip to Italy, complete with first-class flights and luxury hotel suites. All of it charged to company accounts as International Business Development. The itinerary included wine tastings in Tuscany and spa treatments on the Amalfi Coast. Very business-focused, obviously. Every transaction told a story, and the story was simple. Emma Blackstone had decided that marrying Jake meant unlimited access to company funds. She'd been systematic about it, spreading purchases across different accounts and vendors to avoid obvious patterns. Smart enough to be sneaky, but not smart enough to fool someone who actually understood financial systems. The total came to $847,000 over 18 months, nearly $1 million in unauthorized spending, all carefully documented and categorized in ways that would make any prosecutor smile. Emma had essentially been embezzling from her own fiancé's company, probably thinking he'd never notice or never care enough to look closely. But here's what Emma hadn't counted on. Jake wasn't the only one with access to those financial records. His quiet business partner, the nobody she'd worked so hard to push out of their social circle, happened to be the person who designed most of the company's financial oversight systems. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by spreadsheets and bank statements, something shifted inside me. The humiliation and hurt feelings didn't disappear, but they got overshadowed by something much more powerful, the satisfaction of seeing a puzzle solve itself. Emma thought she'd won by getting me fired and isolated from Jake. What she'd actually done was give me the time and motivation to do what I do best: follow the money trail and see where it leads. And this trail was about to lead straight into a conference room, where Emma would finally meet the real Sarah Williams. Not the quiet accountant she'd dismissed, but the business owner who'd been protecting Jake's interests for 12 years. Time for that emergency shareholder meeting. That conference room meeting I'd called for the next Tuesday wasn't just about confronting Emma. It was about showing Jake exactly who he'd betrayed when he chose silence over loyalty. The mahogany table gleamed under those harsh fluorescent lights as Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still processing the numbers I'd just laid out. Emma's face had gone through several color changes since reading that first line. Pale white, flushed red, now settling into an angry shade of pink that clashed terribly with her designer blazer. She'd come dressed for battle, probably expecting to intimidate me with Daddy's money and social connections. "This is ridiculous," she finally managed, her voice hitting that shrill note people use when they're caught red-handed. "These are just business expenses, normal company spending." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. "Emma, you charged a $3,000 facial to the company as client relations. Unless Jake's business suddenly started operating luxury spas, I'm curious which client needed you to have professionally exfoliated skin." Jake's head snapped toward his wife. "You charged what to the company?" "It was for the Patterson dinner," Emma shot back. "I had to look presentable for your clients. The thing about lies is they start small and get bigger when people panic." Emma was doing that thing guilty people do where they explain too much, too loudly, hoping volume makes up for logic. "The Patterson dinner cost the company $847 in total," I said, flipping through my perfectly organized evidence. "But somehow you managed to generate $12,000 in related expenses, including that facial, a shopping trip for a new dress, and professional makeup application. Either the Pattersons are the most demanding clients in history, or you've been treating company funds like your personal allowance." Jake looked like someone had just explained that gravity might be optional. 12 years of friendship, and he was finally seeing what happened when he stopped paying attention to the details. Emma tried a different approach. "Sarah, you're clearly upset about losing your job. I understand that. But taking it out on me and Jake's business isn't going to solve anything." "Wrong move, Emma. Bringing up the firing just reminded me exactly why we were all sitting in this room." "Actually, let's talk about my job," I said. "Jake, do you know how I ended up getting fired from Morrison & Associates?" He shook his head, probably afraid of what he was about to learn. "Your wife called in some favors through Daddy's media connections, had them spread rumors about my work quality and professional conduct. All lies, of course, but effective ones." I pulled out another folder. "I've got the phone records and witness statements. Very thorough investigation." Emma's confident mask finally cracked completely. "You can't prove any of that." Actually, I can. Turns out people keep records of everything these days. Makes my job so much easier. Jake stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Emma, tell me you didn't do that. But Emma wasn't interested in apologizing. She was moving into threat mode, which meant I was about to meet the real person behind all that fake charm. Fine, she snapped. You want to play hardball? My father owns 3 media companies and has connections you can't even imagine. One phone call from me, and your reputation will be destroyed everywhere that matters. You'll never work in this industry again. The room went completely quiet. Jake looked mortified. Emma looked triumphant. And me? I started laughing. Emma, honey, you still think I need this industry? I reached for the final folder, the one I'd saved for last. Let me show you something interesting about that little investment I made in Jake's company 12 years ago. The numbers on that last page were about to change everything Emma thought she knew about who had the real power in this room. I slid that final page across the table like I was dealing the winning card in poker. The header read, Morrison Consulting Partners, Shareholder Distribution Analysis with today's date. Jake picked it up first. His eyes went wide. $15 million, he looked up at me. Your stake is worth $15 million? Emma grabbed the paper from his hands, scanning it frantically. This has to be fake. Call the bank if you want to verify, I said. Those quarterly dividend payments I've been getting, they've been pretty generous lately. Turns out Jake's business has been incredibly successful. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. While Emma was stealing $847,000 from the company, my legitimate ownership stake had grown to make me wealthier than her entire family's media empire. She'd been robbing pennies while I owned the vault. Jake ran his hands through his hair. Sarah, I had no idea your investment had grown this much. That's because you stopped asking about the boring financial stuff. Left it all to the accountants. I smiled. Lucky for you, I am the accountant. Emma's face had gone through the entire color spectrum and settled on furious red. So what? You think having money makes you better than me? No, Emma. Having money makes me your business partner's biggest investor, which means I have legal standing to protect this company from theft. I tapped the audit report. Your theft. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You can't do anything to me. Your father runs media companies, not courts of law. And judges tend to care more about documented financial crimes than newspaper editorials. I kept my voice calm. Plus, I doubt Richard Blackstone wants his daughter's embezzlement case splashed across his competitors' headlines. Jake finally found his voice. Emma, is all of this true? His wife's silence answered everything. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Emma pays back every stolen dollar. She gets permanently banned from all company accounts. And Jake, you implement the financial oversight systems I'm going to design. Emma made one last desperate play. Jake, you can't let her do this to us. But Jake was looking at the evidence spread across the table. Months of lies and manipulation laid out in neat, numbered columns. Sarah's been protecting this business for 12 years. You've been robbing it for 18 months. Emma stormed out, probably calling Daddy before she reached the parking lot. Jake stayed behind. I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. Apology accepted, I said, packing up my files. Now let's get back to business. The nobody had won after all.